Are you curious about how to get into some of the top colleges in the country? I'm talking Duke, Stanford, UC Berkeley, Georgia Tech, University of Michigan. For graduate school, especially graduate school in engineering or science? Well, today I'll talk you through how I ended up applying and getting accepted to all of those and above, including UC Irvine, UC Davis, along with how I didn't actually get into two schools, which was MIT and Columbia, and I'll probably tell you why I think I didn't get those and how I could have fixed my application to have made it stronger. My name is Amari Walker, and I am currently a PhD candidate at Duke University studying environmental engineering. And I'm going to walk you through the steps that I took to apply to all of these colleges and get into them. So first, why did I even apply to grad school? Why did I even think about a PhD or even a master's degree for science? I had started out at the University of California, Berkeley, and I was getting my bachelor's in marine science, which I absolutely loved. The classes were great. The opportunities to do research abroad was amazing. And the question was, what do I want to do with my life? What was I interested in? And the idea of getting into academia by being a professor or teaching really interested me, along with the ability to do research and have my own body of work that I can publish into the field of science and really make a difference in the world. The question of the career and even the opportunity to be a independent researcher and thinker made me say that, yeah, I should at least look into graduate school, whether that's a master's or a PhD. The question choosing between the two, I ended up choosing a PhD because I knew that would allow me to have better funding and flexibility, because most PhDs in environmental engineering or just science and engineering are usually paid. They'll usually give you a stipend and cover your tuition, and that just kind of depends on the situation. But most master's degrees in that same topic are not well funded and usually requires some form of student loans and financial help. I decided that I'd do a PhD. And the thing is that if you don't like your PhD program, or you realize it's just not a good fit and you don't like the research or the situation at your institution, you can always leave with a master's degree at the end of it. So there's still hope that you're not leaving with nothing at the end of the day. I ended up choosing environmental engineering specifically because I really wanted to change the way that we see water quality and think about what I could do to really solve some of the issues with chemical contaminants in our water. And when I had initially come upon that idea, I was studying abroad in this little island called Moorea, which is right next to Tahiti in French Polynesia. So I was doing research there with a couple of my colleagues, and I noticed that some of them were actually getting sick from the water. And that brought to me a lot of questions about water quality around the world, and not just for the colleagues that were there for those 10 weeks or so in that island, but also for the people that are natively born there, and just any of the other countries around the world that do not have access to safe, drinkable water. And that actually includes places like our own hometowns in the United States. There are still places that do not have very good quality water. And I wanted to be a part of that solution making, to really understand what contaminants are there and what are the effect of that mixture of contaminants on the human body and on the environment. Once I decided that environmental engineering was the right place for me, I kind of had to realize that I needed to get the background necessary in that topic, because I studied just oceanography. So I needed to increase my math skills, a little bit of the coding, and even environmental engineering classes themselves to understand how contaminants move in different places and how they can end up into our skin or into the air versus water. So really understanding those processes in a mathematical way, including how different microbial contaminants are present, along with how many different kinds of communities encompass a colony. Those were all very interesting topics that I had to learn before I decided to apply to my program. And that's not to say that you can't apply without having that prior knowledge. I had a lot of colleagues that had come from a totally different degree like myself and did environmental engineering, and they were fine. It just took a little bit more work of just getting up to speed with the math and the science. When I decided to get a PhD in environmental engineering, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I said, who am I to think that I can be an engineer or try a different major or do all of these complicated math classes and, things that I had never exposed myself to before. And so it really just took a lot of time of saying, just try it, do your best, and really keep pushing. And so that's kind of the way I took it. I said, if nobody accepts your applications and you don't get in, you just keep going and you'll reapply again the next year. I decided to take a 5th year for my bachelor's program just to get the background knowledge for myself to feel a little bit better about applying to these programs. So I took all of the multivariable calculus, the linear algebra, the MATLAB computing courses, and anything else that could really make me a stronger applicant and be ready on day one to start taking those classes. While I was in my 5th year, that is when I ended up applying to graduate school. There were a couple of steps that I actually took during that process. The first step was to decide my top 5 to 10 colleges that I was going to apply to. That wasn't easy, but what I really relied on were the US news sites for what are the best programs out there. So I looked at the top 20 to 50 within environmental engineering for graduate school. And then I looked at the degree programs. So if it was in a civil and environmental engineering department or a chemical and environmental engineering department, and how that changes the requirements for classwork, for research, for even teaching. All of those things I wanted to take into account to see, is this going to enhance my ability to learn, or is it going to delay my ability to graduate in a timely manner? And just like, how supportive is each program geared towards their students? And then finally, within that list, I wanted to compile a list of professors, because with PhDs, you're working with one person for at least 5 or maybe 4 to 6 years. And so you really want to make sure that that research is what you're interested in, and they have the equipment, the tools, the funding, and the support that you need over that timeline. Once I kind of narrowed it down between 6 to 8 schools, then I started working on things like my GRE. So I needed the GRE scores to be, within the range that would be acceptable for applying. And when I was really nervous about it, I ended up looking at some of the websites of the colleges for comparison. The one that I mainly looked at was Duke, because they had provided statistics on the averages for all of the scores for students that they had accepted or had decided to come there. And it was really kind of a reaffirming that I was in the right range for scores and that I'd be okay in applying. And so that was really helpful for me. And then I ended up taking the GRE 3 times. And I don't think that taking it 3 times is necessary. I was just in a really great program, the Cal Nerds program at UC Berkeley, where they provided me prep for the GRE, and then they also paid for the exam. And so I had taken it my sophomore summer, my junior summer, and then finally the last time during my 5th year to see if I could get a better score. But really by the second time, I really didn't need to take it again. It didn't make that much of a difference. So really just study as much as you can for that, and then, just take the exam. I'm pretty sure I spent at least 5 or 6 Saturdays in a row taking the 5-hour exam replicas just to see what it was like and build that endurance. And by then it was good to go. So yeah, just put the time in when you can and just take the exam maybe once or twice. With the GPA, that was already a done deal by the end of my 4th year, because that's what you have to submit when you apply. So I had kind of kept that in mind as much as possible, but I was aware that my school had different grading styles than other schools. And so I just kind of hoped that they took that into account. But I think having at least a 3.0 in some kind of range is pretty helpful when you're gauging how to get into the top schools in the country. After my GRE scores were all set up and, I was working on my grades and had that all squared away, the next step was to work on my personal statement. And so I had spent the summer before my 5th year really kind of thinking about, what is environmental engineering? What does it mean? What are the topics at hand that I'm most interested in for studying and researching and learning more about? And then how does that fit in with who I am as a person, the things that I've done, and the things that I want to do with my life? and how that school is going to catapult me to my ultimate career goals. Thinking about that, thinking about great stories to share were very important for me to cultivate and design my personal statement. And then I spent a lot of time editing and sharing it with others that could give me good feedback, because that statement is something that I use not only for applying to schools, but also to graduate fellowships. And while I said yes, a PhD in science and engineering usually will be fully funded and paid, sometimes that has requirements associated to it, like having to teach every semester that you're funded through that institution, or having to do extra research projects on top of that to get your funding, you name it. And so there's always some kind of associated cost to that, and that can either delay you or just really overwhelm the process. And so it really helps to come in with your own layer of funding if you can, by applying to the NSF fellowship. And then I also applied to things like the GEM fellowship, which was for diversity. When working on that personal statement, I had multiple people read it over and give me feedback and critique to help me. Once I had that together, the next step that I took was to work on my letters of recommendation. I had prepared a list of about 5 people that could help me in applying to all of my fellowships and my graduate school applications. And so when I approached them, I really said, will you be willing to write a strong letter of recommendation? Because that word strong makes a big difference. I think it allows people to be very honest with you on how well they know you and how well their schedule is, and just their ability to write on behalf of yourself. Don't be afraid to talk about that, and really make sure that you're getting people that care about you and are invested in you as a person and want to see you get into the best schools in the best fellowships and programs. The kinds of professors that I asked to write letters for me included 3 different categories. 1, the people that knew my ability to conduct research through all of the summers that I did different research opportunities. 2, the people that understood me as an academic and my ability to understand information and really think about it and communicate it back. And then people that understood my outreach and like who I was as a person and why I cared about, working with certain communities like Women in Science or the African American Theme Program. And so people that understood my identity and the ways that I give back and things that I find important and value. With those 3 types of letters of recommendation, it allows the folks that are reading my application to see who I am as an entire person and why I'd be a good fit for that school. So once I asked the people that I was interested in to write a letter of recommendation for me, and they had actually said yes, I sent them a letter of recommendation packet. The letter of recommendation packet that I put together included a lot of information. The first information on the page was just basic information about myself, along with all of the components that are present in the letter of recommendation, and then a set of deadlines. So it was 2 different sections: deadlines for the colleges that I was applying to, and then deadlines for the fellowships that I was applying to, so that they could kind of be aware of all the things that were going to be up and coming. The following pages included my interests, my passion, my career goals in 1 page, and then my entire resume of work that I had done, volunteer service I had done, any kind of outreach, any of the awards and honors that I had gotten, along with a list of research opportunities that I had completed and the things that I had done in that research. After that small information about who I am as a person, I included my drafts for my personal statement, my research statement, and the letters of interest. After my overarching resume and who I am and what I wanted to be, I included my drafts for my research statement and my personal statement, so that they could see how I was framing the story of who I am as a person, and they could write their letter according to that, so they could back up some of the things that I was talking about. So that letter of recommendation packet was roughly about 12 or 15 pages total, and it was very helpful for them so that they could make a very pointed letter. Another thing that I think would have really helped me was for each letter writer to really explain to them the things that I wanted them to highlight and things that I found important that they could really speak on because they had seen me in that experience. So if you're really thinking about who to ask and how to ask it, just consider adding that into your letter of recommendation packet on that person and the things that you think they can really highlight for your application. I asked my recommenders to be a part of my application process about 6 to 8 weeks in advance. So really giving them enough time to decide they can or can't do it because they have a lot going on that semester, and then also just to plan for it in their calendar so they can put every deadline in there so that they don't fall behind on it. And then I gave them a few gentle reminders as things popped up. But most of them were pretty on top of it once you give them a wide range of everything that they need to get it done. And if you give them the links early, it's even better because some of them like to do all of the letters of recommendation in one day, which is very helpful. During that time, I was also working on organizing my application and filling out the small bits and pieces of information, just every weekend putting in work towards doing the application process for both the fellowships and the graduate school applications. So sometime around December, January is when the last applications were done. And then I had to play the huge, long, soul-crushing waiting game just to see what I got into and if I got any fellowships or anything that could help me. So I waited somewhere up until I think the beginning of March to start hearing back from colleges whether I got in or not. Once I started getting all those letters of acceptances and sometimes denials, yes, I got some denials and it was not fun. It happens. I didn't get the NSF when I had applied initially, but I did get the GEM fellowship, which was very helpful for my first year funding. And then I, slowly got the acceptances to places like Berkeley, Stanford, Duke, and then the big denials from like MIT and Columbia. And I think the reason why I didn't get into those schools had a lot to do with I had no clue who I really wanted to work with. I did not have a good purpose for why that school would be a good decision for me or a good fit. And so I did not customize my application as well as I could have for those two institutions. So there's some wins, there's some losses, and you just keep working through them and you celebrate the big things. And then you have to make your big decision. One of the great things about it is actually the ability to do visitations. So my first visitation was actually in January, and it was at Duke University. And so they were my first visit overall after sending the application in. And it was very helpful to really just see what the campus was like, the professors, how the students got along with everybody, and just see how well I would be as a good fit. And so I think that weekend definitely made a huge impression on why I ended up being at Duke. And then, doing more visitation weekends at all the other universities was very important. I didn't do one at every single university, but, time constraints, funding, and then sometimes they don't always invite you for a visitation. And that just depends on the institution, and that's okay. So when it's time to make the big decision, you really got to narrow it down to things like, where do you want to live? How much money are they offering, especially in the place that they are? How does that funding equate to their cost of living? That's a huge factor, especially if you're there for 4 to 6 years, living on a low wage. It's going to be very difficult. It's also important to consider who's going to be there with you. What kind of cohort are they bringing in? What are the other students like that are already there? Can they support you through that program? And then also what your lab mates are like. Are they willing to help you learn the instrumentation, learn the tools, and just be prepared to help you through the research process? Along with what's the relationship you would have with your advisor that you chose? And are there other advisors that are there as well that could help you with your research or give you an alternate opportunity to work in their lab? Because sometimes you don't end up doing the actual research that you go in with the intention of doing. And you realize that this whole nother field is actually your passion project. Choosing the advisor is pretty big because you have to find somebody that has the research project that you're interested in. And then also making sure that the university has other professors that have research projects that you could equally do and be happy about. Because I know when I chose, it was initially a project that I was very interested in. And then I realized once I started getting into the knowledge and the literature that I was not very interested in that. And I became super passionate about microplastics and chemicals in it. And so I had to switch advisors, which was very lucky for me that there was a professor actually working on that. And so thinking about the institution and all of the professors that are available there and that you can possibly work with is very important as well. That's a great way to start narrowing it down to at least 2 to 3 schools of interest. And when I narrowed it down, it was between Berkeley, Duke, and then also Stanford. So the top 2 schools for environmental engineering, and then I think Duke was in the top 15. The big thing to do after that is to make a list of pros and cons for each institution, kind of add it up, and then narrow it down to 2 schools. So that became Stanford and Duke. And then finally, I ended up just flipping a coin. I got as many testimonials from both Stanford, Duke, people that were there, professors, just kind of talking to as many people as possible. And they both sounded like very good schools that would support me and help me through this process. But at that point, it didn't matter because they would both be an amazing place to be in, and it was just no point in really looking back. And so I flipped a coin. Once it landed, it was Duke, and that's where I went. So we all make our own decisions and we all have our own way of figuring things out, but it's best to just kind of go with it and not look backwards. I hope that helped for you all on the process of what I did to get into all these schools and then also decide on where to go. And if you have any questions about just any of it, just going through, how do I do this? Why is it worth it? What do I need to do to be the best person that I can be for this? Just reach out to me in a comment. And don't forget to share this video with anybody else that's interested in graduate school or hasn't even considered it, because it's a really wonderful opportunity to develop into a better professional, a strong independent thinker, and just do some really interesting work that adds to knowledge. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to me. And thank you for watching this video.
If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.